It was the late afternoon of June 24, 1944. Over the cold, gray waters of the Norwegian Sea, Flight Lieutenant David "Pop" Hornell guided his Catalina patrol aircraft through layers of mist and wind. The waves below rolled like steel, sharp and endless, as if warning any man who dared to cross them. Hornell had flown many missions before, but this one felt different. The sea was restless, and the silence inside the aircraft heavy. His crew, 8 men, scanned the horizon with weary eyes, each aware that danger could rise from the deep at any moment. Suddenly, a voice broke through the intercom. "Contact to port! Possible submarine sighted!" Hornell turned his head sharply. Through the glass at the far edge of the stormy horizon, a dark silhouette moved just below the surface. A German U-boat. He didn't hesitate. "Battle stations! Prepare for attack!" The Catalina banked left, engines roaring, diving into the wind as every man aboard braced for combat. Far below, in the shadow of the sea, another crew, German sailors of U-boat 1225, raised the alarm. 2 worlds, one sky, one sea, about to collide. The voice of the port gunner echoed through the Catalina once more, urgent and sharp. "There it is again. Bearing 20 degrees left." Hornell squinted through his cockpit glass. The outline of the U-boat 1225 grew clearer with every second, a dark serpent cutting through the icy sea. The sun, low and cold, glinted off its steel hull. "Confirmed visual," Hornell said into the intercom. "All guns ready. Depth charges armed." Below, aboard the submarine, Oberleutnant zur See Ernst Sauerberg snapped orders in rapid German. "Hard to port. Anti-aircraft crews to your stations." The battle began before a single shot was fired. Both crews, hundreds of meters apart, knew that only one would live through the next few minutes. Tracer rounds lit up the air like streaks of fire as the U-boat's 20mm and 37mm cannons opened up. "Fire!" Sauerberg shouted, his voice swallowed by thunder. The Catalina shuddered. The sky exploded in sparks and smoke. Metal tore from its wings as shrapnel ripped through the fuselage. The ocean below looked closer now. Too close. Hornell gritted his teeth. "Hold steady! We're not backing off!" Through the chaos, he glanced at his crew, faces pale, determined. Every man trusted him completely. Every man knew this could be the end. The hunter had found its prey, but the prey was fighting back. Deep inside the narrow steel hull of U-1225, the air was thick with oil, sweat, and panic. Red emergency lights flickered as Commander Ernst Sauerberg gripped the periscope handles. "Surface guns! Concentrate fire! Bring that flying boat down!" he roared. The roar of the engines above could be felt even through the deck plates. Every man on the bridge knew the stakes. One direct hit from the Catalina's depth charges could split the submarine in 2, but Sauerberg was no coward. He had faced hunters before. This time, he intended to shoot the hunter out of the sky. The gunners atop the U-boat reloaded and fired again, shells bursting around the Catalina's wings. One projectile slammed through the thin metal near the cockpit, scattering shards of glass across Hornell's face. He didn't flinch. In the back, the radio operator Sidney Cole struggled to send their coordinates to base. "Message transmitting," he yelled, but he didn't know that the antenna had already been shattered. Their SOS was vanishing into static. "Keep your eyes on that bastard," Sauerberg shouted to his crew. "Faster, faster, he's diving!" Through his scope, he saw it. The Catalina descending straight toward him, one engine trailing smoke, the other still roaring like a beast. It was suicide. But in Hornell's eyes, it wasn't madness. It was duty. He whispered to himself, "If we miss this chance, they'll sink a convoy tomorrow." Then he pushed the throttle forward, and the sea below erupted into war. The sky became a battlefield of thunder and flame. The U-boat's 37mm flak cannon roared, throwing molten streaks through the air. Every burst shook the Catalina like a storm hammering glass. Hornell's co-pilot, Denomi, shouted over the chaos. "We're hit! Right wing's tearing apart!" The pilot's hands gripped the controls tight. "Hold her steady! We're still in this fight!" A round exploded near the starboard engine, fire blooming like a cursed flower. The heat seared the cockpit, but Hornell kept the aircraft low and steady, diving head-on toward the submarine. Behind him, the gunner, Laurent, fired burst after burst from the Browning 303s, sweeping the deck of the U-boat. Sparks erupted along the tower where German sailors scrambled to their guns. Sauerberg's men ducked for cover, a few collapsing as bullets tore through the air. But the enemy fire never stopped. The Catalina's hull rattled, rivets popping, and sections of the skin peeled away. The vibration grew unbearable. The aircraft screamed in protest. Inside, Sidney Cole, bleeding from a wound in his shoulder, refused to stop trying the radio. "Mayday! Mayday! Catalina down!" His words faded into static. He didn't know no one could hear. Hornell glanced at him briefly through the rear mirror, saw the blood, saw the pain, but he had no time to speak. The altimeters spun downward. "Prepare for the run!" Hornell shouted. Every man braced. If they failed now, they'd die trying. And from the sea below, the U-boat commander lifted his head to watch the burning aircraft dive straight toward him like a flaming sword. The Catalina groaned as if alive, metal twisting, bolts snapping, the right wing trembling under the weight of its own destruction. Smoke filled the cabin, choking every breath. Hornell wiped the soot from his goggles and looked at the instrument panel. Half the gauges were dead. "Right engine's burning out," Denomi shouted. "Cut the fuel line," Hornell commanded. "Fuel's already leaking, sir! It's spreading!" The smell of gasoline was everywhere. Flames licked along the fuselage, crawling closer to the cockpit. Still, Hornell didn't pull away. The U-boat was directly beneath them now. "Hold your course," he barked. The crew could see the enemy gunners reloading. Tracers cut across the sky like red lightning. Bullets shattered the nose glass. Fragments sliced into the navigator's arm. He screamed but kept his post. Hornell's eyes were steady, unblinking. He knew this was it. One chance to make every risk mean something. "Depth charges ready," yelled the bombardier. "On my mark," Hornell replied, voice calm amid the chaos. The U-boat's commander, Sauerberg, watched from below, gripping the railing of his conning tower. "Incoming! Dive! Dive!" he yelled, but it was too late. The Catalina, a crippled, flaming angel, was coming down fast. And in the split second before release, the world turned to chaos. Fire above, steel below, and courage between them. Flames tore through the starboard engine, turning it into a spinning torch. The Catalina shook violently, its frame howling as Hornell forced the control column forward. The nose dropped steeply toward the churning gray sea. "Hold on, boys," he shouted over the roaring wind. "We drop on this pass or not at all." The bombardier's eyes locked on the target, the dark silhouette of U-1225, turning frantically to port, white foam curling around its hull. Tracer fire streaked upward again, ripping through the air, grazing the Catalina's belly. "Depth charges ready?" the bombardier cried. "Release in 3, 2, 1, drop!" 4 massive depth charges fell away, whistling through the storm. Hornell yanked back the controls, trying to lift the wounded bird away from the sea. Below, Commander Sauerberg looked up just in time to see a ball of flame streaking above his head. "Got him, Himmel!" he gasped. The charges struck the water around the submarine. A moment later, boom, 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 boom. Columns of white and black water exploded upward, swallowing the U-boat. For a moment, nothing remained visible but smoke and shattered waves. Hornell's crew erupted with exhausted cheers. "We hit her! Direct hit!" But their celebration was cut short. The right engine tore free from the wing, spinning into the ocean below. Fuel sprayed across the fuselage, igniting the torn aluminum. Denomi turned toward Hornell. "We're losing control!" Hornell's voice was calm, almost peaceful. Then we'll go down together." The Catalina, victorious yet dying, began its fiery descent toward the sea it had conquered. The thunder of the explosions still echoed through the clouds as the Catalina fell, wounded but unbroken. Below, the surface of the North Sea boiled, waves rising like mountains as U-12-225 disappeared beneath the chaos it had created. Inside the aircraft, the men clung to anything they could grab. The deck tilted sharply, loose shells and casings rolled toward the tail. "We got her!" someone shouted, voice trembling between triumph and fear. Hornell's gaze stayed fixed on the shattered horizon. "We did," he whispered. "But now, we have to survive it." The Catalina's right wing was gone, smoke trailing like a banner of fire. The remaining engine coughed, sputtered, then caught again, just enough to keep them gliding. Behind them, the sea still frothed where the U-boat had vanished. The smell of burnt metal and fuel filled the cockpit. Hornell tapped the altimeter, barely responding. He turned to Denomi. "Prepare for ditching. We're not making it home." Denomi hesitated. "We're going down?" Hornell nodded. "And we're going down together." The men exchanged brief, wordless glances, not of panic, but acceptance. They had done what they came to do. The enemy was gone. Below, the sea looked cold, merciless, endless. Hornell tightened his harness. "Brace for impact. May God guide our hands." The Catalina descended through the smoke of its own victory, gliding toward the wild gray ocean, the same waters that had swallowed their enemy moments before. But fate wasn't finished with them yet. The Catalina sliced through the clouds, its wounded body glowing against the twilight. Behind them, black smoke marked the grave of U-12-5, now silent beneath the sea. The mission was complete, but survival was far from guaranteed. "Both wings failing," Denomi warned, gripping the controls. "She's not gonna hold." "Keep her level," Hornell ordered. "We're going to try for a sea landing." Inside the fuselage, chaos reigned. The smell of burned rubber and gasoline filled the air. Metal screeched. The fire had spread across the cabin wall. The engineer, Donald Scott, fought to keep the flames back with an extinguisher, but the heat was unbearable. "Sir, we can't hold her much longer." Hornell's eyes stayed fixed on the waves below. "We don't have to, just long enough to reach the surface." A violent shudder ripped through the plane. The left engine sputtered, then died. The Catalina began to sink in altitude, its nose dipping dangerously low. "Everyone, tighten your harnesses," Hornell shouted. "Prepare for ditching." The men obeyed without hesitation. They knew what that meant. At their speed and altitude, a single mistake could tear the aircraft apart on impact. Sidney Cole, wounded, exhausted yet still at his radio, tried again to send their position. "Mayday! Mayday!" The words bled into static. He looked at Hornell, eyes pleading. "I don't think anyone's hearing us." Hornell gave a faint smile. "Then we'll make them see us." Ahead, the Norwegian Sea stretched like a frozen graveyard. The Catalina's shadow skimmed the waves, and as the last light faded, Hornell whispered, "Hold on, boys, we're going home, one way or another." The wounded Catalina roared over the waves, its engines coughing like dying beasts. Smoke trailed behind, the smell of burning fuel mixing with the freezing spray of the sea. "Flaps down!" Hornell shouted. "Flaps down! Confirmed!" Denomi replied. The aircraft trembled violently as Hornell turned her into the wind. The men braced for the crash, hands gripping belts, eyes closed, hearts pounding. "Hold tight!" The Catalina struck the first wave with a brutal impact. Boom! The nose lifted sharply, throwing everyone forward. The aircraft bounced 40 meters into the air, then slammed down again, harder than before. Metal screeched. Water exploded through the side windows. "Brace, brace!" Hornell yelled. The second hit ripped the starboard float clean off. A wall of freezing water burst through the fuselage, drenching the crew. One of the wings cracked. fuel spilling into the sea, the cockpit filled with smoke and steam. "She's done!" Denomi cried. "We're sinking!" Hornell's voice cut through the panic. Calm, commanding, absolute. "Everybody out! Now!" He unbuckled his harness, helped Cole up from the floor, and forced open the side hatch. Flames licked along the fuselage as the aircraft began to list heavily to one side. "Scott, inflate the port raft! Laurent, the starboard!" The engineers obeyed, struggling against the freezing wind. The first raft inflated, yellow against the gray sea. Men jumped, one by one, into the water. Cole clutched his bleeding arm and stumbled toward the hatch. "Go!" Hornell shouted. "I'll push you clear!" The last thing they saw of the Catalina was the glow of its burning wing, reflected in Hornell's goggles. Then, with a hiss of steam and fire, the aircraft slipped beneath the waves. They had survived the crash. But the true battle, against cold, hunger, and despair, was just beginning. The sea was chaos. Shards of metal floated among waves stained with oil. The Catalina, their faithful bird, was half submerged, its burning wing casting a ghostly orange glow over the black water. Hornell pushed Cole toward the raft. "Move! Get clear of the wreck!" Cole stumbled into the freezing surf, gasping as the cold bit into his chest. The others followed, Denomi, Scott, Laurent, and the rest, dragging themselves into the inflatable rafts. "Everyone accounted for?" Hornell yelled over the storm. "One short! Laurent's still by the blister!" Denomi shouted. Without hesitation, Hornell dove back toward the sinking aircraft. Flames hissed as icy water swallowed them both. He found Laurent clinging to a shattered frame, eyes wide with terror. "I've got you!" Hornell shouted, pulling him free. They surfaced together, the Catalina groaning one last time before vanishing beneath the waves. A roar of steam filled the air, then silence. Only the wind and the relentless crash of water remained. The surviving men pulled Hornell and Laurent into the raft. Inside, water sloshed around their boots. The flimsy rubber floor flexed with every wave. "Bail it out," Hornell ordered. "Use your helmets, anything you've got." Scott scooped frantically, throwing water overboard. Cole rummaged through the survival pack, checking supplies. "We've got flares, some rations, no radio." Hornell turned sharply. "No radio?" Cole shook his head. It went under with the plane. The realization hit them like a blow. No radio meant no rescue. No one knew where they were. Hornell's breath came out in white clouds. "Then we stay alive," he said quietly, "and we make damn sure they find us." The men huddled together, shivering, their raft rising and falling with the furious sea. Behind them, the Catalina's burning wreck sank into darkness, taking with it the warmth, the noise, and every sense of safety they'd ever known. The night swallowed them whole. Only the hiss of wind and the crash of waves reminded them they were still alive. The men huddled together in the small raft, teeth chattering, uniforms frozen stiff. The Arctic wind cut through fabric and flesh like knives. Hornell looked around. 8 men, but barely any strength left among them. The ocean spray turned to ice on their faces. "Keep moving," he whispered. "Don't let the cold win." Donald Scott, the engineer, bailed water out of the raft with his helmet, hands trembling uncontrollably. Denomi's lips were blue. Cole's wound had reopened, blood freezing on his sleeve. Still, no one complained. Hours passed. The waves tossed them high, then dropped them into valleys of black water. The horizon was endless. Hornell, his own body shaking, forced himself to stay alert. "Change positions," he commanded. "Rotate. Nobody stays in the water longer than 10 minutes. He knew what cold water did to men. It stole their life silently, minute by minute. He wouldn't let that happen. For a brief moment, a gap in the clouds revealed a pale sun. Then darkness returned. They were alone again. Cole looked up weakly. "Sir, how long you think till they find us?" Hornell didn't answer. He stared at the horizon instead. He couldn't tell them the truth. No one had heard their radio. The raft rose on another massive wave. From its crest, they could see nothing but an endless field of gray water, broken only by chunks of ice. "Hold on," Hornell murmured to himself. "We've survived fire. We can survive this too." But even as he said it, his hands had gone numb, and the line between life and death blurred beneath the freezing spray. Morning came, but it brought no warmth. The wind howled across the open sea, turning every drop of water into shards of ice. The men looked more like ghosts than soldiers, faces pale, eyes hollow, lips cracked and silent. Sidney Cole, stubborn as ever, refused to give up on the radio that no longer existed. "If we had it," he muttered, "I could have reached base. They'd know where we are." His voice broke, a mix of guilt and exhaustion. Hornell leaned closer, his tone firm but kind. "You did your job, Sid. We all did. Now we fight to stay alive. That's the mission." He gave a small broken smile. The others nodded, drawing strength from his calm. For hours they drifted through endless gray. Ice gathered around the raft's edges, making it heavier and slower. Each time they tried to scoop it away, the freezing water stung like needles. Then, through the fog, Donald Scott's voice cracked with sudden hope. "Plane! I see a plane!" Every man lifted his head. A black dot crossed the distant sky. Another Catalina, flying high and steady. "Signal flare!" Hornell barked. Cole fumbled through the pack, hands stiff and bleeding, and pulled out the red flare. He struck it once. Nothing. Again. Nothing. On the third try, it burst to life, a bright red streak cutting through the Arctic air. They waved frantically, shouting, voices lost to the wind. The flare burned for 60 seconds, sputtered, and died. The Catalina above kept flying. Straight, unbothered, unseeing. "Another one!" Hornell shouted. They fired a second flare, and again, no response. Silence. Just the wind. Scott lowered his head. "They didn't see us." Hornell's lips trembled, but his voice remained steady. "Then we wait for the next one. Somebody will." Hours passed, and darkness began to fall again. The sea stretched out, infinite and merciless. Their hope was thinning, but Hornell's resolve never broke. Hours blurred together until someone shouted, "There! Look! Another one!" High above the storm clouds, a Catalina patrol plane circled the gray horizon. For the first time in almost a day, hope pierced the cold. The men waved and screamed, their voices lost in the wind. "Signal flare!" Hornell ordered. Cole's frozen fingers struggled with the flare gun. He fired. One streak of red light climbed through the air, burning bright against the clouds. Every man held his breath. The aircraft above banked slightly, then straightened, continuing on its path. "They didn't see us," Denomi murmured. Hornell clenched his jaw. "We'll make them see us." "Shh! Fire again!" he commanded. Another flare burst upward, this one brighter, closer. For a moment it looked like the Catalina might turn, and then it did. "They saw us!" Cole shouted, his voice breaking from exhaustion and joy. The distant plane dropped altitude, flashing its landing lights in acknowledgement. But the sea below was chaos, whitecaps the size of walls. Landing here was suicide. From above, the rescue Catalina blinked a signal in Morse. "Survivors sighted, seas too rough." "Help coming." Hornell nodded weakly. "They found us." The men cheered, some crying openly. After 20 desperate hours, someone finally knew they were alive. Far away, a Medear's rescue boat, HSL 2507, left the Shetland Islands, speeding through the storm toward them. Above, the Catalina remained as their guardian, circling again and again in the freezing sky, its engines a faint promise through the wind. "Hold on, we're coming." Time lost all meaning. The men had been in the water for over 21 hours. The rescue plane still circled above, but the freezing sea was winning. Every gust of wind was a blade, every wave a hammer. Hornell's body shook uncontrollably. His lips were blue, his eyes half closed, yet he refused to stop leading. "Rotate again," he ordered through chattering teeth. "No one stays in the water too long." He forced a system. 2 men in, 2 men out, so no one would freeze completely. When his turn came, he stayed longer than anyone else, holding the raft steady while others climbed in. "Sir, you'll freeze," Denomi protested. Hornell smiled faintly. "Then I'll freeze last." Each minute dragged like an eternity. The sea kept swallowing and spitting them out, and exhaustion dulled their minds. One of the engineers, Laurent, began to mumble nonsense, his eyes unfocused. "Laurent, stay with me!" Hornell shouted, shaking him. But the man's head dropped forward, lifeless. Silence fell over the raft. No one had the strength to cry. Hornell closed his eyes briefly, whispering a prayer, then pushed Laurent's body gently into the sea. The men were breaking, but Hornell refused to. He looked up at the circling plane, its engines humming like a heartbeat. "They're still there. That means we're not done yet." As the storm raged on, Hornell's sight began to fade. His movements slowed, his voice grew softer, yet even as his body failed, his leadership did not. "Hold, just a little longer, boys," he murmured. "They're coming." And with that, the man who had fought the fire, the sea, and death itself finally closed his eyes, still clutching the raft, still protecting his men. Through the gray dawn, a faint beam of light appeared on the horizon, the rescue boat HSL 2507 cutting through the storm. The men could hardly lift their heads, but someone managed to whisper, "They're here." The boat drew closer, its crew shouting orders and throwing ropes into the icy water. One by one, Hornell's men were pulled aboard. Half frozen, delirious, but alive. Denomi, the co-pilot, collapsed on the deck, coughing seawater. His first words were barely audible. "Where's the skipper?" The rescuers turned back to the raft. Hornell lay slumped against the side, his hands still gripping the rope, as if holding the boat steady for everyone else. His face was pale, eyes half open, breathing faint. They lifted him gently aboard. For a moment his eyes fluttered open. He saw his men safe, wrapped in blankets, alive. A small smile touched his lips. Calm, proud, final. Then his eyes closed and did not open again. For 4 hours the rescuers tried to revive him. But his body, beaten by fire, salt, and ice, had given all it could. 5 of his crew would live to see home again. Because of him. Weeks later, Flight Lieutenant David Ernest Hornell was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest honor for bravery. His widow received it on his behalf, tears glimmering under a solemn sky. In the records of war, his name became legend, not for the number of enemies he destroyed, but for the lives he saved and the courage he refused to surrender. And somewhere over the endless North Sea, the wind still carries his legacy. The story of the man who met death with fire in his heart and a smile on his face.